All right, in this second section in our chapter on culture, we'll look at elements of culture. So by the end of this section, you'll be able to learn how to define values, beliefs, and norms. You will also understand the importance of symbols and language to a culture. With that, you also understand and know how to discuss the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis about language. And last but not least is to be able to explain the role of social control within culture. So let's start out with the material cultures, which are objects or belongings to a group of people. So this includes clothing, jewelry, food, tapestry, and so on. And I hope that by looking at this picture here, you can see certain material culture of the Thailand. I believe the women here are wearing Thai traditional dresses. Non-material culture, as we discussed earlier, are ideas, attitudes, and beliefs of a society. So maybe, one is that, teens have power, or the values for protecting our future, right? Or values for gun, for safety and proponent of being gun control, and so on. So what are values and beliefs? It's important to emphasize that values and beliefs don't always have to be religion-based. They can be, but not always. They can also be secular, kind of like our values for the right to vote, our values that power rests with the people. So values is defined as a culture standard for discerning what is good and just in society. In other words, values are the standards by which people define good and bad, beautiful and ugly. Every group develops both values and expectations regarding the right way to reflect them. Beliefs, quite similar to values, but not exactly. They are the tenets or conviction that people hold to be true, such as the belief in karma, the belief, so that's a little bit more religious, or the belief that your team will win, your football team will win, right? So again, similar to values, beliefs can be religiously based as well as more secular. In our society, right, with the non-material culture, we have the ideal culture as well as the real culture. The ideal culture is a case in which the standards of a society that a society would like to embrace and live up to. The reality, right, the real culture is the way in which society really is based on what actually occurs and exists. So, for example, the ideal culture is maybe perhaps everyone's beautiful and perfect, right? But in the real culture is that not everyone has perfect skin. And so the real culture is that there's, huge consumption of makeup, for example, in order to achieve the ideal culture. Or another example of ideal versus real culture is, let's say, in our ideal culture, American society embraced celibacy, or at least no teenage sex, or in pregnancy. But the real culture is that there are many teenage unplanned pregnancy. And in discussing elements of culture, we also need to be aware of one very important element, which is social control. It's a way to encourage conformity to cultural norms. So social control can be things like what we value, right? What we believe in, as American, for example. Sanction is a mechanism of social control. It's a way to authorize or formally disprove of certain behaviors. So sanctions are oftentimes external or coming from our society and not internal, coming from ourselves. Sanctions can be positive or negative, right? Positive sanctions are good sanctions, right? That do it again, right? Such as money reward, a prize, a smile, or even a handshake. So that's the positive sanctions are expressions of approval. Negative sanctions, on the other hand, denote disapproval for breaking a norm. So negative sanction may include, for example, a fine, a frown, or harsh words. Now, to relieve the pressure of having to strictly follow the norms, some cultures have more holidays, which are specified times when people are allowed to break the norms and not worry about being sanctioned. So Mardi Gras is an example of more holiday in our society. Some society has more holiday places as well, locations where norms are expected to be broken. So an example would be red light districts where prostitutes are allowed to work on the street. Second element of culture is norms, which are based on values. They are the visible and invisible rules of conduct through which societies are structured. So there are two types of norms. One can be formal, which are established and written down and supported by an institution. Informal are casual behaviors that are generally and widely conformed to. So, for example, a formal norm would be that we have a course policy, certain behaviors are expected because it's written down. And these some policies are supported by our, institution, which is education. Informal norms are maybe things like, for example, students who walk into a classroom, and almost always they would sit down at a chair facing the front, facing the board, which is a space where the professor would stand. So there's really no written laws that students have to sit down and be quiet, and they can't stand in the front of the room, right? But again, this is an example of informal norms. Norms can vary in terms of their importance to a culture. So there are, first of all, mores, which is probably which are the strongest compared to folkways and taboos. They're more pervasive in our society. Mores are the moral views and principles of a group. Mores or the norms are believed to be essential to core values, and we insist on conformity. A person who steals, rapes, and kills has violated some of society's most important mores. Folkways, or norms that are not strictly enforced, such as passing on the left side of the sidewalk, they may result in a person getting a dirty look, but they're not as strong as mores. Norms that one group considers to be folkways, another group may view as mores, such as, for example, a male walking down the street with the upper half of his body uncovered may be violating a folkway. At the same time, a woman doing the same thing may be violating mores. Taboos are norms that are so strongly ingrained that even the thought of them is greeted with revulsion. So like eating human flesh or having sex with one's parents are examples of such behavior. So here I've included a video of shocking norms from around the world. It's about 7 minutes. So go ahead and pause my video that you're watching to watch this YouTube video, which I find very, very fascinating. Okay, so by now I hope you watched that video in order to understand how there are norms around the world that might be very, very different from our norms. A third element of culture is symbols and languages. Symbols are simply gestures or objects that have meanings associated with them, and they're recognized by people who share a culture. For example, when we see flags in a country, we know that the flag represents a particular country, state, or in some cases a city, a village even. Or here I've also included images of religious symbols. By themselves, they're just, they look like pictures, right? But they have meanings attached to them. So cross represents Christianity, Star of David represent Judaism, and so on. Language is a symbolic system of communication. It is the system of communication is based on symbols that can be put together in an infinite number of ways in order to communicate abstract thought. So each word is a symbol to which a culture attaches a particular meaning. It is important because it is a primary means of communication between people. It allows human experience to be cumulative. Each generation builds on the body of significant experiences that is passed on to it by a previous generation, thus freeing people to move beyond immediate experiences. Language allows for a social and shared past. We are able to discuss past events with others. Language also allows for us to plan future activities with one another. It allows the exchanges of perspectives, such as ideas about events and experiences. And language also allows people to engage in complex shared goal-directed behavior as well. Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, states that our thinking and perception not only are expressed by language, but actually are shaped by language because we are taught not only words, but also a particular way of thinking and perceiving. Rather than objects and events forcing themselves onto our consciousness, our very language determines our consciousness. So, for example, sexist language influences the way we see men and women. For example, firemen, policemen, male nurse. So, as you can see, the way we perceive a fireman is a man rather than firewoman, for example, or policeman. Usually we associate that job to be associated with a man. Nurse, on the other hand, we assume it's a woman, and if not, then we have to say the word male nurse to characterize the nurse, to clarify that the nurse is in fact a male. Okay, gesture is using one's body to communicate with others, and it's a shorthand means of communication. People in every culture use gestures, although the gesture and the meanings differ. Confusion or offense can result because of misunderstanding over the meaning of a gesture or misuse of a gesture. There is disagreement over whether there are any universal gesture. They tend to vary considerably around the world. Because some gestures are so closely associated with emotional messages, the gestures themselves can often elicit emotions. So I've included here a video of how American hand gesture might be interpreted differently around the world. And it's only 2 minutes, and it's a very interesting video. And it's a good way for us to conclude this second section on elements of culture.